My name is Mark. This is The Path of Zen, and today we are talking to Bhante G, who is currently in Thailand, and he's been a ordained Theravada monk for, is it 10 years now?
Yeah.
All right. So I've invited Bhante G to talk to us about a few topics. And one of the items that we're going to talk about, at least from the Theravada and Bhante's point of view, is what is Buddhism really about?
Well, thanks for the introduction, Mark. Buddhism. Well, to me, Buddhism is only one thing and one thing only. It's a practice towards liberation. It's the development of wisdom. I guess it's a few things, but they're all sort of the same. It's basically developing yourself, developing all your capabilities to full fruition, and achieving, going deep into the citta, which the citta is a Pali word for mind. And in Buddhism, particularly let's say in the tradition that I follow, mind and brain are two different things. So you have mind, which is in the chest, the citta, and then you have the brain. So in the citta is where the wisdom faculty lies. And in the brain is where you get the control of the six senses. So when we talk about going beyond, we're talking about going into the citta and let's say destroying ignorance. Yeah, so I guess basically the practice, Buddhism is about destroying ignorance and nothing else really. Once the ignorance is destroyed, the cessation of dukkha is realized. So that's basically it. There's nothing much else to it.
So as you're destroying ignorance, is that achieving liberation?
Pretty much, because it's no different from, the cliche example of turning the light on in the room, in the darkness. You turn the light on and you can see. Wisdom is like that. The Buddha talks about in the Dharma chakra, which is the setting the wheel of Dharma in motion, when he realized certain every stage of the noble path. He talks about wisdom knowledge arose, knowing arose, light arose, wisdom arose every time he had a realization. So the light of wisdom, the Buddha talks about this in his first discourse, right, to his first 5 disciples. So what we're basically, the more you destroy ignorance, the freer you are, because you start to see things as they really are.
So to imply that we are seeking freedom implies that there is a captor or a slave master, something that has encaged us, or something that has trapped us. What can you tell us about what the Buddha said about who or what has entrapped us?
It's called avidya in Pali. Avidya. Okay, so I guess the closest English translation of that would be ignorance, but there's more to it. Vidya means like seeing, knowing, seeing things as they are, like seeing the truth, seeing the thing, understanding every phenomena and understanding the universe as it is. And because we don't understand the universe as it is, and we cannot see things as they are, we're not seeing things in a true fashion, and therefore, because of that, there's there's stress. Because we're not understand. When you understand something, stress dissipates. It's like anything, like any subject, it's like even problems with in a social setting with people. When you understand something, then the stress gets dissipated. Maybe you don't understand why someone's not talking to you, for example. Then finally you have a conversation with that person, and they explain what happened. So you start to relax, right? So ignorance causes stress, and it causes like instability. It's kind of like you don't know where to put your feet. But once you start to see things as they are, there's a kind of serenity to it, like a tranquility to it, a kind of bliss to it, kind of happiness to it. You know, and that can be said for small things all the way to the big things.
So that's a very interesting answer. The next logical question based on that would be, if we are to free ourselves, where would we be free to do? Would we leave? What is this freedom?
Well, wisdom, the freedom of wisdom, right, is incalculable. You can't really. It's kind of like someone who has, I don't know, $20 billion in his bank account or her bank account or their bank account, right? Someone who has only $20,000 in the bank account can't comprehend what it'd be like to have $20 billion in the bank account, right? So it's you can't really comprehend it until you experience it, right? And most of us won't ever get to experience $20 billion in our bank account, right?
Most of us know.
Right. So for the person who's experiencing $20 billion in their bank account, they have a certain knowing. They have a certain knowing. They have certain realities that someone who has $20,000 in their account does not have. There are certain realities of life that having $20 billion in your account, that gives you a certain reality that it's hard to explain to someone who's got $20,000 in their account, so to speak, right? So wisdom is pretty much the same, and that's why Buddha doesn't really explain nibbana. He just said he talks about, at least in this tradition that I follow, the Buddha never talks about the result. He talks about how to get there. So in other words, it's kind of like, okay, you talk to someone who's climbed to Mount Everest, right? And that person has gotten to the top of Mount Everest. Then someone who's never climbed before, someone who doesn't understand the struggle, and asks that person, what's the view like from the top? You know, what's the view like from the top? Well, it's very difficult to explain, isn't it? It's kind of like, okay, how do I explain this view? Oh, you see clouds, you see distance, you see this and that. But it's so different when you've climbed that mountain and gone through all the difficulty, all the steps, all the things you learn on as you climb that mountain about yourself, about so many things you're learning as you're climbing to the top. And the view is kind of the finish. It's kind of like, okay, it's done, right? Now, of course, it's not a very good example because eventually you've got to climb down, right? But Nibbana is like that. Once you get to Nibbana, once you can see, like once you've gotten to the top of Mount Everest, you can never unsee that view. You can never unsee or forget about that experience. And so that gives you a big nourishment, right? But that view is a one-of-a-kind view. It's only reserved for those who can put in that effort to climb to the top of that mountain. That view is reserved for them, right? So Nibbana is kind of, the Buddha says, all right, I'm going to teach you how to be strong enough, what you need to get to the top of this mountain. Once you get to the top of the mountain, you'll understand by yourself. You know, as you're climbing the mountain, you'll start to understand by yourself through all the difficulty.
And that's the teaching of come see for yourself.
Basically, yeah, ehipasiko.
Exactly.
So it's kind of like ehibiku, where Buddha used to say, when he used to ordain monks, he used to say ehibiku. You know, that was it. Like, come see monk. So, in other words, Buddhism is not about telling you how it is. It's not about telling you anything. It's about practicing, and then you start to see for yourself what's going on. Because we don't want to accept things in this, but it's kind of like humanity wants things real quick, we want instant gratification, but the work is not really done. But someone who's really worked hard at something over a long period of time cannot explain to someone who has not done the work what the result is, what the experience of the result is, or the fruits of the results. It's impossible for that to understand. But someone who's worked hard and at something and gotten the result they got the result and more than the result. Because what usually comes after you've worked hard for something, you've got an aim in your mind sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes the aim could be banal. I just need to survive. But sometimes you work at a goal and you hit the goal, but there's so many other things that come with it that you learn along the way. It's kind of like people who want success, you learn that you have to learn about failure, for example, which you don't normally, take into consideration.
Okay, this is actually really good because this is leading us right into the second topic statement. And through this channel, I always encourage of creating a strong Buddhist practice versus a weak Buddhist practice, which is a lot of times what we see on the internet. How now that you're talking about to strive to gain this view, to strive to gain what the Buddha saw, what is a strong Buddhist practice versus a weak Buddhist practice?
Well, I would say that the weak Buddhist practice is when your mind and your speech and your actions are not unified. In other words, you say something, but your mind is somewhere else, and your actions don't match up either. So you're doing the talk, but you're not doing the walk. So it's kind of like false compassion, where people talk about compassion but don't, and or like virtual signaling, which has become a big thing, but they're not really living their lives in a virtuous way, right? And I mean, I'm not saying that any people are doing it. I'm just saying as an example. It's kind of like Buddhism, in terms of the weakness, is where you actually don't follow, or you're not actually, for example, if the first 5 precepts is abstain from killing any living being. That means a mosquito, a fly, a cockroach, a spider, kind of like wasps, even the poisonous things, even the ugly things, even the dangerous things, right? So, a weak practice would be to just do that selectively or subjectively, or to try to also rip down the teaching in itself and just choose what is convenient to you and kind of discard what's not convenient. For example, sexual misconduct, or let's say abstaining from drugs and alcohol, right? Because the precept is abstain from alcohol. So, and there's a lot of people who say, well, I'd rather, what's wrong with having a glass of wine every now and again? Why can't I drink one beer? All those kind of things. See, that's kind of weak. That's not really locking into the practice. That's not really like putting your feet firm and saying, okay, I'm really going to abstain. I'm really going to follow the precepts. Then the second thing is concentration practice, and developing a strong concentration practice where you're not consistent with it. You're not thorough with it. You're not applying it. You're not doing it every day consistently and going through the obstacles, where you just do it when you feel like doing it, as opposed to doing it in a disciplined, consistent way. So that's a weak practice, and that would not really yield anything for any person, really. So the weak practice is not striving to develop and maintain virtue. So you got develop and then maintain. Develop and maintain your morals. Develop and maintain virtue. Develop and maintain discipline in practice, in concentration, for example, consistent and thorough application continuously. Now that's strong practice. Strong practice is where you're doing it daily, consistently, whether you feel like it or not, whether you want to or not, you're just doing it every day. But also, that's one side of it. The other side is really sticking to it, like no matter what happens. So in other words, morality, you don't steal. We abstain from stealing or taking what is not given. We abstain from taking what is not given. So if it's not given to you, you don't take it. Now, in terms of lying, like false speech, gossips, harsh speech, idle speech, for example, like, it might be easy to, fake your resume for a job, for example, or lie to someone or tell white lies or certain things to get out of a situation. But what you're doing is you're not abstaining from lying, you're selling out. So that's weak. That's weak. Because if you try to stick to the moral precept, you have to develop wisdom in order to get around to survive. But it's easy just to sell out, right? Sometimes with things, So even with killing, like, oh, there's a spider, well, it's dangerous, I'll just kill it because I can't be bothered trying to catch it and putting it in a jar and putting it out, under a tree or something like this. Even cockroaches in your kitchen, for example, instead of keeping the kitchen really, really clean, giving it a good clean, being diligent with your kitchen, you just squash them all the time because they keep coming back and coming back. Of course, there is a pestilence factor sometimes, because sometimes there are other people, like in apartments and stuff, condos, where other people aren't clean and they just keep coming in. So obviously there needs to be some kind of balance to this. But I'm just talking on a personal level, right? Just trying to bring out the comparisons between weak and strong. So in other words, you say, I will not, abstain from killing, then you abstain from killing. I abstain from false speech, then you abstain from false speech. I abstain from stealing of any kind. Even if you're hungry and it's, there's an apple there that you can take, find a way around it. If you steal it, then again, that's weakness in you. Weakness is giving up, not following through. Another thing is like being honest, or is with right speech, for example, where you say you'll do something, but in your mind, you're not there. It's actually, you say yes, but in your mind, it's no. Or you say no, and in your mind, it's yes. And this is very confusing for yourself, but it confuses other people too. It's bad communication. So, weakness is not really being in tune with what's really going on inside you as well, and not following through with that. Because that's hard to do. That's hard to do, really, aligning your speech with your mind and your actions. That's the strong practice, where you can see, like, for example, right speech, for example, is saying what is accurate, saying what is factual, and saying what is correct. But there's a fourth thing that's very interesting that the Buddha talks about: at the right time.
Oh, yes.
Right? So it's
key.
not like what I'm saying is you just say the truth like an AK-47. No, there's a time and place to say the truth, and then there's this time and place to be quiet. There's time and place. So part of wisdom is knowing when to say and when not to say. But instead of lying, just be quiet. Don't say anything. All right? You don't consent.
And sometimes, though, you can be accused of lies by omission, where you're not saying something when people feel you should.
Yeah, well, that's where the strength comes in, because
exactly.
the external obstacles are always going to be there.
Because I found that sometimes it's best to say nothing, because it would only bring more confusion to people who are just beginning Buddhism or just beginning Zen. sometimes I found it's best to not really talk about certain things because they're not ready to hear it.
Yeah, well, I'm referring more. That's true on that level. I agree with that, but I'm talking more about on your own practice,
Oh yeah.
because you asked me about weak and strong practice, right? So I'm referring to when we talk on an individual level, is what you're saying true? Is it accurate? Is it factual? Is it correct? And is it at the right time? Now, the weak practice is to say it whenever, is not to be aware, is not to use sati or mental attention and concentration. So you're not paying attention to what you're saying and you're just darting it out and just whatever. So that's weak. Being really attentive of your words and saying it at the right time is difficult to do. That's the strong practice, for example, in speech. That's what I'm talking about. So
Okay.
just to put it in the context, yeah.
So in building a practice, a lot of Zen students feel they must find a teacher and a practicing sangha. What is your view on finding a teacher and the practicing sangha?
Two things on this, I guess. I can only go by the way I've done it. You have to find your own way. Buddhism, the way I see it, is a do-it-yourself practice.
Yeah, I
However,
agree with
it's
that.
very helpful. But the Buddha did say, live with and protect the monks. Live with a wise person. Always pay respect to the wise. Always visit the wise. So the wise is people who are wise, because Buddha didn't specify who is wise. It's, you don't have to be a Buddhist to be wise. But in terms of if you can't find anyone, then you practice yourself. And of course, having a sangha around and having a good teacher around, that's beneficial on a large level, on a
Well, having
massive
a
level.
strong teacher.
Well, it depends on the character. It depends. Sometimes you need a compassionate teacher. Sometimes, see, here in Thailand, there's all different kinds of teachers. So we kind of say, oh, that he's a metta monk. So he has got a lot of goodwill. So this monk won't necessarily discipline you or speak hard or speak straight to you, but more or less, a metta monk will just accept you as you are and just give you that goodwill, right?
So
That's kind
would
of
would
that's
it be
kind of
fair
some,
to
yeah.
ask you that you've obviously spent your time with many different teachers then?
Yeah. But in the sangha, that's the benefit of having a sangha, because when you have a sangha of monks who are practicing well, you can learn things from all of them. It's not just
Yes,
like one big teacher, and that's it. That doesn't. There is one big teacher. It's called the Buddha,
exactly.
and that's it. And that's it.
Yes,
The rest,
because
the rest is the sangha.
yes,
So,
I always tell students that when I ordained as a lay Buddhist back in 90 or back in 87, the person who ordained me specifically told me that they were not my teacher, that they were just the preceptor, and that my job was to find my teacher. And I literally spent 10 years going to different Zen centers, listening to different teachers speak, spending times living at their Zen center, sometimes 3-4 months, and with them. And I probably have listened and met, I guess, probably between 10 or 15 different teachers before I found the one teacher that I really felt I could learn something from.
mm,
And I tell Zen students this because a lot of people feel that they have to stay with the first person they meet. This is the old cliche of, when people joke about, oh, he married the first girl he met. But it seems to be that way in Zen, where people kind of get married to the very first teacher they met, and they think that they go, oh, that's my teacher. I'm like, well, why is that your teacher? And they're like, well, that's the first person I went to.
Well, I mean, that's valid. To me, that's valid, and I'll tell you why. Because if that hurt, the way I see it, like putting Buddhism to the side, like my background, I came from humble beginnings, like a lot of people, and my parents were immigrants in Australia. So, and they didn't even know the language or that kind of thing, right? So it's that. So when someone taught me something or gave me a nudge in the right direction, I always, in my heart, in my mind, I always have this sense of appreciation, and I'll always call that person my teacher. Like, for example, my first martial arts teacher. Well, he wasn't the best martial arts teacher, but he taught me some things. And in my heart, he'll always have a place there. In same with meditation and all the teachers that I've come across, they're always going to be my teachers because they've taught me something, right? It's just what it is in Western culture. I think we have this thing about this, we are the one, and there has to be that one thing, and it's just like, it's all bricks and mortar. It just has to be one person and loyalty. No, it's not about that, because even the Buddha had two teachers before he became the Buddha, where they taught him something, right? His first
Yes,
two teachers.
actually, didn't
Yeah,
he spend many years visiting anybody and everybody? That's what I
exactly,
read. Yeah, he
exactly,
sat with
exactly.
so many different teachers, learning every single austerity, every single practice he can get his hands on.
Exactly, exactly. See, it's just that in the West we don't know sangha culture, but sangha culture, for example, in the monk culture, it's quite common. This is where it gets complicated, right? So you need to be a little bit patient with me so I can explain. I'll try to do it quickly. Sometimes you get into a school or you meet a group of people and it's great, and there's no reason to leave because your development is, you kind of got it from the beginning. It kind of works. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. There are many monks who ordain in the same monastery and never leave. Not even after 40, 50 years. They never leave because they find they find, comfortability or whatever. It works for them. On the other side, you could say they've developed comfort zones and it's not good for their development. But who's to say? Who's to say? Right? There are monks who wander. There are monks who stay by themselves. There are monks who will never leave the teacher's side. There are monks who will go see a teacher from time to time. Like in my case, what I like to do, I like to go see what I would say is my real meditation teacher, the master of all masters that I've met. He's at Wat Tansahai in Udon. I can only stay there for a period. Like I used to stay there long term, but I can only stay there for a month or two with him because it's so intense, and I need to get away to process and just work through what I've learned there for a period of time, and then I go back. So there's many different ways you can learn, and I also have, when you're ordained as a monk, for example, it's called kusua in Thai. It's basically you have the preceptor and you have your acharya, like your teacher and your preceptor, but they're both still your teachers, but they're not your teachers. Because see, in Buddhism, everything is teaching you. But the main thing is, right, just to finish this topic, is whilst you're searching, you still need to be practicing yourself. That is fundamental. Like you still need to be observing the precepts. You still need to be working to a schedule or to some sort of discipline, and still be working towards your own, let's say, betterment, working towards your own virtues continuously, whether you have a teacher or not, whether you've met the right one or group of people or not. You still need to be doing your own personal practice. That's paramount. It doesn't matter, because there's many examples here. Like even when the Buddha was alive, many people met the Buddha but weren't able to attain right view, for example, or see things because they weren't ready. They weren't mature enough. The practice wasn't there. So if you haven't found the teacher, then get into your practice more. And then when you come across a wise person, you're more apt to accept. You're more ready to receive the opportunity to, when the opportunity comes, you're more ready to take advantage of it.
That's an extremely wise thing, because you do have to have a degree of maturity in order to accept the teacher, because that is true. So I have the last question, which I think fits the ending of the conversation. Now that you've been living in a Buddhist country with a strong Buddhist practice, and you've been doing this for quite some time, can you speak to us about your observations as to why there is so much confusion and disarray within the Western Buddhist centers and sanghas?
Oh, that's a long one. So I'll give you the brief one, and then maybe we can do a proper video on this, because that's a long one. There's a lot of factors there. It's very complicated, really complex.
I
I
agree with
think,
that.
yeah, it's like, I don't know if it's in disarray. I just think there's confusion and things like this, because I mean, how many people spend actual time at a temple, like sleep there, get into the groove of a temple, get to know monks, get to know.
I have.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm talking about you're talking about Western culture, right? So, we're talking about a very small percentage, first of all. Second of
Yeah.
all, Buddhism is just not in the education system. It might be now, like, they might teach a little bit, but it's not in the education system. It's not on the
Most
curriculum.
people understand, or they are taught the kind of the TV version of it,
Right.
the little Buddha movie version of it.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, that's why you got confusion there. But, there you go. There's the answer. I mean, it's not like we've got monks going to high schools, primary schools, all over America or all over Australia. Maybe it happens in, maybe some schools, very select schools, very small. It's not in the university. It's, it's in some universities, but,
If you take a comparative religion course, you'll run into Buddhism.
right, but you're not gonna run into meditation 3 hours a day. That
No.
experience is what I'm talking about. The experience of being held accountable for your actions. Because in Buddhism, particularly in this tradition, you're held accountable. The Vinaya is all about accountability for your actions. If you create offences or you break the rules, then you're held accountable.
So
So
you
that's
would
a
say
part of
the
Buddhism.
Vinaya it helps you build a strong practice.
Yeah, well, that's the design. It's helped to cut off unwholesome actions, unwholesome deeds, and
Which
like,
would weaken your practice, yes.
yeah, and that's one thing about Buddhism that people just don't understand. Buddhism is a strict practice. They can't take that. They
No.
think it's just lovey-dovey. But if you think things are lovey-dovey, then you don't understand compassion, for example. You don't understand what
Oh,
goodwill actually is. So
yes, and I tell people that Zen also can be a very difficult and strict practice, but it could also be, it's kind of also an elite practice in a lot of ways too, where you almost have to master, the Vinaya, being very disciplined and being very diligent to build that strong practice, and not be tempted away from your strong practice, not be backsliding into a weaker practice. And I would say what you're saying then is that we in the West are basically plagued with weak Buddhist practices.
yeah, I just think it's like you said. It's lack of understanding. There's an image of what Buddhism is. The fat monk and everything's fine and it's all bliss and it's all happy stuff. But no, Buddhism is actually work. And, the monks, there's accountability. The Buddha was very strict. Look, there's one thing about the Buddha in the West that people, I guess, don't understand is how actual strict the Buddha was, how staunch the Buddha was, how strong the Buddha was, how devoted the Buddha was, how the conviction and the steadfastness and just the sheer determination of the Buddha and all the obstacles he overcome. And when he set up the sangha and the rules, the standard of practice, that's where the missing link is people think there's Buddhism, but there's no discipline, there's no accountability. No, there's a lot of accountability in Buddhism. Like, a lot of lay people, when they come to me, they can't handle it, right? They can't handle when I talk to them straight in certain things or I check them. But, they've never been around sangha. Like in the sangha, the monks will check each other. The monks check each other. You have to. It's part of the rules. You can't. There's certain things you can't allow, and there's no negotiation, right? So the weak Buddhists would kind of it's okay, it's just Buddhism and whatever. We can cut corners. We can kind of let that go, turn a blind eye here, turn a blind eye there. Actually, no, you can't. Mate, look, I'll finish on this, okay? Anything you do in life, right? For those people who have cut corners and have done that for a long period of time and then finally have realized that leads you to that. It leads to cut corners. So when you sit down at the end of the day, what you have is not a complete thing. But when you've done your due diligence, when you've put a lot of effort and you've done something with a lot of discipline and you've worked hard at it, when you sit down and look at it, you get the whole package.
Exactly.
And these are things that you can't negotiate with this. This is something you'll learn if you're very dedicated to whatever you do in life, whether you're a carpenter, a plumber, an artist, a bank manager, or whatever it is, right? When you really devote yourself to it, you'll go through cutting corners because we do get lazy. We do get slothful, sure. But when you get back into that flow of discipline again, you start to realize you have to actually go back and clean that mess up.
Oh, yeah. I always have told people that if they put as half of much effort as they do making money into their practice, they would be much farther along the path than they are now. And,
yeah.
And we know that as being a monk, that that is your full-time job 24/7.
Pretty much.
And for that, we honor you. And that will be the end of our interview with Bhante G. We will certainly have him back on again, permitting time and the situation. All right, thank you. And as everybody watching, thank you for watching. And please remember to like and subscribe.